Poor and orphaned, she was humiliated at her boss's wedding. Until, in the midst of the humiliation, one look changed everything. Watch until the end. This story will touch your heart in a way you won't expect. In that grand house, filled with rules and porcelain, no one ever called her by name, only the girl. She arrived too young to reach the sink, brought in by a wealthy woman who proudly claimed, "I rescued an orphan from the shelter." It sounded noble to outsiders, a trophy of generosity. But those who looked closely could see behind the so-called charity there was convenience wearing the mask of kindness. From the very beginning, the unspoken rules were clear. There was no adoption, no place at the table. What awaited her was work. Tiny hands that should have been holding pencils or toys were soon lifting buckets, washing heavy pots, and learning, through repetition, what it meant to serve. Even as a child, she understood that value, in that house, belonged only to those with last names. Alone in the world, with no relatives to speak up for her, she became useful, like an old chair no one notices until it's missing. She cleaned what others dirtied, prepared what others ate, and returned at night to a tiny room beside the pantry. To some it was a home. To her it was a boundary. She did attend school, a modest public one nearby. With second-hand notebooks and borrowed supplies, she kept up, bright, observant. She could read between the lines, even when nothing was said. She knew the mistress of the house was upset just by the sound of her heels clicking on the tile. She could feel contempt even when it came wrapped in sweet words, and she understood early on that no matter how well she performed, she would never truly belong. Birthdays came and went without cake. Christmas passed without gifts or a name on any list, but she grew quietly. Between the dust of furniture and the steam from soap suds, she grew. She folded bed sheets with care, brewed coffee before the sun came up, and endured advice that was really humiliation in disguise. Phrases like, "You should know your place. Don't think you're special just because of that little face." Words like those lingered, not shouted but etched, and yet through it all something undeniable took root. Even without makeup, without new clothes, without applause, she was becoming beautiful, a quiet, strong beauty that formed between chores and silence. It didn't ask permission to exist. It just did. Guests noticed. Delivery men looked twice. Even distant relatives paused. She wore donated shoes and old skirts, but there was a glow in her skin, a confidence in the way she stood, even while carrying a tray. The mistress's daughter noticed too, and didn't like it. She began to tighten the leash, sharpen her tone. "Stop putting on lipstick. You're not going anywhere. You don't need to strut around here, just do your job. Looking that pretty for free, that's dangerous." But the girl didn't talk back, not out of fear but wisdom. She had learned that sometimes silence is more powerful than protest, and her silence wasn't submission, it was resistance. And oddly enough, it was that quiet strength that made her impossible to ignore. There was light in her, and it refused to dim. They could try to keep her in corners, hidden in chores and commands, but something inside her was growing stronger than all their efforts to contain it. And in a world that tried to control everything, a simple glance, on the most unlikely day, was about to unlock a change no one saw coming. At African Village Story, every video is more than just a tale. It's a real, raw experience that touches, transforms, and lingers. Subscribe now and turn on notifications. You won't want to miss a single twist of fate, a single act of justice, or a single unexpected love that dares to bloom where no one thought it could. In the middle of the Golden Hall, surrounded by rare flowers and forced laughter, there was a man who wasn't smiling. While everyone else was distracted by excess, eyes darting toward the intricate decor or the shine of the bride's dress, one gaze remained fixed on something no one else seemed to notice. A calm, steady gaze, cutting through the noise of the party as if searching for something beyond the obvious. That man was Davy Montenegro, a familiar name in the quiet corridors of high business, not so much for the surname, but for the silent weight of his decisions. Owner of one of the country's largest construction firms, used to meetings in glass towers and multi-million-dollar contracts, he rarely attended social events. But that day, he made an exception for a simple reason. He was the groom's godfather. The groom, son of a minor company partner, wanted to impress, and Davy, despite his reluctance, accepted the invitation as a gesture of courtesy. He expected nothing more than shallow speeches, overpriced rings, and an elegant charcuterie. table, but he encountered something that didn't fit into any social protocol. In one corner of the hall, near the dessert table, a scene held him still, not because of noise, but because of the silence surrounding it. A young woman in a plain maid's uniform was picking up the remains of a fallen tray. She didn't defend herself. She didn't blame anyone. She just quietly gathered what had been thrown to the floor with contempt, body bent, eyes down, but a posture that stood tall from within. That was Clara. Davy didn't know her name, not yet, but he knew how to recognize dignity when he saw it. There was something in that gesture, so ordinary, yet so deeply meaningful, that broke through all differences of class, age, or background. The way she hid her embarrassment, the way she arranged each sweet as if they still mattered, said more than 1,000 words. There stood someone carrying the weight of being unseen, and yet remaining whole. Next to Davy, other groomsmen chatted about wine, about weekly investments, about the bride's dress. None of them noticed what he was seeing, maybe because they'd never learned to look beyond what sparkles, maybe because they were too busy trying to stand out to see the one who had always stood silently in the background. A waiter passed by and muttered under his breath, not even realizing Davy was listening. That girl, she holds this whole house together. Came here as a kid and grew up scrubbing every corner. Davy didn't reply, but the comment stayed. More than the bride's dress, more than the emotional vows. It was her restrained gaze that lingered, the look of someone who had been forgotten so many times and learned to survive among shattered pieces and fake smiles. The irony was that for a man used to seeing the world from above, helicopters, penthouses, boardrooms with mirrored windows, that single act on the ground hit deeper than any skyline. It had depth, it had truth. In the way Clara moved, there was a story. In the way others ignored her, there was a social wound. But what struck him the most was realizing that, even as the target of disdain, she didn't lose her composure. She kept serving, not out of submission, but out of survival. There was no rebellion in her eyes. There was strength. Davy couldn't explain what he was feeling. It wasn't pity. It was something else. Maybe reflection, maybe memory. He thought of his mother, also a domestic worker, who often came home with hands full of marks and pride unshaken. He remembered a childhood where everything was counted, bread, uniforms, time. Maybe that's why that look touched him in a way others would never understand. The music continued, glasses clinked, but in that corner of the hall, something far more important had begun. Not romance, not yet, just a man truly seeing someone the world insisted on hiding. And sometimes, it's that kind of gaze that changes everything. Davy didn't even realize it, but in that quiet moment, something had begun to take root, slow, unannounced. And you? Do you believe in love at first sight? Let us know in the comments. Yes or no. Sometimes it only takes a moment, and it stays with you forever. When the waltz was announced, every light in the ballroom turned to the center. The orchestra tuned their instruments, the groomsmen straightened their lapels, and the guests positioned themselves around the dance floor as if they were the audience of a grand show. Everything seemed meticulously designed to shine. But no one expected what would come next. Natalia, the bride, glided through the stairs, wearing a flawlessly tailored gown and a smile trained for the camera. Nothing about her felt spontaneous. Every step, every pose, every detail of the wedding had been carefully crafted to confirm one single narrative: she had won. And to make that even clearer, she decided to improvise. She signaled to Clara, with that half smile that never came with warmth. She called her over with a finger like someone summoning a forgotten object, and announced out loud for everyone to hear, "This girl left a broken glass near the dance floor. Please clean it up." The tone was casual, but the silence that followed made the impact unmistakable. Everyone understood what was happening. It wasn't about the glass, it was about power. The move was calculated. She exposed Clara at the most important moment of the ceremony, at the center of attention, down on the floor, as if to remind her of where she supposedly belonged. Clara hesitated. For a second, her body froze, as if something inside whispered that this wasn't right. But years had taught her that the harshest punishments don't always come with yelling. Sometimes they come dressed in smiles. So she knelt down with the same composed posture as always, and reached out to pick up shards of glass that, in truth, were no longer there. And that was when something entirely off script happened. The crowd was still murmuring when firm footsteps crossed the dance floor. Davi Montenegro walked across the room in silence, not as someone asking permission, but as someone who knew exactly what he was doing. He stopped in front of her, knelt down slowly, gently took her hand, and said in a calm voice, "No, tonight, you dance." The room stopped. Literally. The conductor nearly dropped his baton. Waiters froze mid-step, holding their trays. The guests parted their lips in disbelief, unable to process what they were witnessing. Natalia, stunned, lost her breath for a moment, but quickly regained it. She shouted from where she stood, already holding the microphone, "You've got to be kidding, right? With that filthy maid? This is a ceremony, Davi." But the words faded before they could land, because the music, for some reason even the conductor couldn't explain, began to play again. Davi didn't look at anyone else. He simply turned, extended his hand, and waited. Clara, still kneeling, looked at the open palm, looked into the steady eyes, and for the first time she hesitated, not out of fear, but disbelief. She stood, slowly, as if her body was checking if this was actually real. Their fingers touched, and in that instant, the dance floor became another universe. There was no ballroom, no party, no bitter stares, only a space suspended in time, where humiliation had been interrupted by something new, something that had no name yet. The dance began. She was tense, her steps uncertain, her body unfamiliar with being led. But he guided her with firmness and respect. There was no rush, no suggestion of romance, only presence. A man who truly saw, a woman who, for the first time, was seen. People reacted in different ways, some with second-hand embarrassment, others with fascination, many in total silence. But the loudest thing in the room was the music itself, and a kind of breath caught in the air, as if everyone knew they were witnessing something that could never be undone. Clara trembled, not from fear, like before, but from feeling something she never had, the weight of being recognized, right there, in the place where they had always tried to erase her. And even without knowing what might come after, she already understood. Some dances are not about the steps. They're about courage. If this part of the story moved you, where humiliation turned into honor, tell me in the comments. What did you feel? Have you ever lived something like this? Sometimes, sharing what once hurt is the first step to healing and inspiring someone who needs to hear it. The silence left behind by the dance was shattered, violently. Natalia, still holding the microphone, stood frozen for a few seconds, as if her body couldn't process what her eyes had just witnessed. But the moment the music stopped, she erupted. She shouted first at the conductor, then at the guests, and finally pointed at Clara, releasing a phrase that cut through the air like a blade. "This is a wedding, not a circus." That girl took advantage of the moment just to show off. Her mother, always elegant in appearance and poisonous in words, walked over with quick steps. She wasn't there to calm things down. She came to escalate them. I knew it was only a matter of time. Ever since that orphan came into this house, it's been one embarrassment after another. The words didn't come from anger, not really. Anyone paying close attention could see it wasn't indignation driving them. It was fear. Fear of what the dance had revealed. Fear of losing control. Because that night the maid hadn't just been seen, she had been chosen. And that, for a family used to scripting everything, was intolerable. Clara tried to speak, just one sentence. She wanted to explain she hadn't asked for any of it, hadn't asked to be pulled into the spotlight, hadn't even understood what was happening. But no words came out, not because she didn't have them, but because they wouldn't let her. She was pushed away in haste like someone wiping away a stain before it ruins the carpet. Davy stepped forward, raising his voice for the first time that night, but they blocked him. Two of the groom's relatives stood in his path, trying to smooth things over with common sense. They said it was a misunderstanding, that it wasn't something a groomsman should get involved in. But everyone knew, including Davy, that this was no longer about etiquette. Clara crossed the hall under a barrage of sharp stares. Some guests laughed, others looked away uncomfortable. Most simply watched in silence, the kind of silence that so often protects the cruel. Outside the air was colder and heavier. The lights of the party still flickered through the windows, but the world beyond that glass was entirely different. Clara didn't cry, not out of pride, but because she was drained. She walked all the way back to the small room she had lived in for years, without ever truly belonging there. Inside, silence. The same narrow bed, the same wardrobe that smelled of old soap, She folded her few clothes and placed them into the same worn cloth bag she had since childhood. Each fold was neat, just as she had always done. Even now she handled her life with care. She sat for a moment, looked around. The walls that had held her silence, the corners where she cried without sound, the cracked mirror where she learned not to look too closely. That had never been a home, just a shelter of convenience. And after that night, she knew there was no staying anymore. Back at the now quiet mansion, Davy stood by the window. The guests were leaving. The newlyweds posed for their final pictures, but his mind wasn't there. His gaze drifted toward the empty space left behind. Something felt unfinished, like a question that refused to go unanswered. He called over one of the trusted security guards, asked simple, direct questions. Her full name, how long she had worked there, where she lived, who she spoke to. The answer was vague. No one knew much. She was just the girl from the house, the one who never caused trouble, the one who always knew her place. And that was what bothered him most. How could someone be so present and yet so unknown? He ordered them to find her, not out of impulse, but with the clarity of someone who knew this story couldn't end at the curb. Not all dances stop when the music fades. Some continue echoing within us. When a woman is humiliated in front of everyone but chooses to walk away with dignity, something inside us rises with her. If this part of the story moved you, leave a comment. #Strength for Clara. Because every woman who falls deserves a whole world rooting for her to rise again. The morning hadn't even fully broken yet. The sun tried to rise behind a cloudy sky, as if it too had doubts about the day ahead. At the bus station, people hurried by, dragging suitcases, searching for buses, running from the uncomfortable silence that always seems to hover in places like that. But one figure stood out from it all. A young woman sitting on the floor leaning against a concrete pillar, a small suitcase pressed against her legs, her eyes swollen, sunken, tired. That woman was Clara. She had been there since the night before, not waiting for a specific bus, just with nowhere else to go. She held a ticket in her hand, but no destination. Not because the world was too big, but because, for those with no roots, anywhere can feel just as foreign. Her shoes were dusty, her blouse wrinkled, her face calm but far from peaceful. The headphones she wore blocked the noise around her. No music played, just silence, like a wall between her and the world. And that's why she didn't notice the black car pulling up across the street. It stopped slowly, discreetly, without drawing attention. A dark sedan, tinted windows, simple elegance. The door opened gently, and Davy stepped out. He wore the same style as always. Sharp suit, upright posture, confident steps. But something had shifted in his eyes. Less control, more urgency. He scanned the area, spotted the figure by the pillar, and walked. As he neared her, he crouched down, didn't speak from above, didn't impose his presence. Sat beside her, knees bent, elbows resting, like someone who also needed air. His voice was soft but steady. "I don't want you to disappear. Not after everything I saw." Clara took a moment to react, turned her face slowly, confusion on her expression, not because he was there, but because of how he was there. She hadn't expected it, didn't understand it, and most of all, didn't trust it. "Why are you here?" she whispered, like someone afraid of the answer. Davy looked ahead, not at her. "Because someone needs to be." He took a deep breath. "I'm not here to fix anything, I just want to offer you a chance, a new page." He pulled out a business card from his pocket. On the back, the name of his company. In his eyes, something harder to name. He offered her a job. No dramatic promises, no "you deserve more." Just an opportunity. Clara didn't move, didn't respond right away. She'd heard promises before, had been called special by people who later used the label as a trap. She'd poured coffee for elegant guests who praised her poise and ignored her the next day. So it wasn't the suit that scared her. It was the risk of believing again. "I can't accept," she said. Her voice wasn't harsh, just sad. "People have smiled at me before and made me pay for it later." Davy didn't push, didn't tell her she was wrong. He simply placed the card beside her suitcase, stood up quietly, and before leaving, looked her straight in the eyes. "When you're ready, I'll still be here." And then he walked away. No pressure, no drama. Clara sat there, the card between her fingers. She didn't know what to do next, but something had shifted, because even with the fear, it was the first time someone truly saw her and asked for nothing in return. Have you ever felt invisible at some point in your life? If so, share it with us in the comments. I've been through something like this. Might be the start of a conversation the world needs, and someone out there needs to read so they don't feel alone. Davy had met beautiful women before. Intelligent, influential, powerful, but none like Clara. There was something beyond her appearance. It was the way she carried pain in silence, the way she avoided eye contact, the way she expected nothing from anyone. A kind of beauty the world often tries to erase, and the more he observed, the more certain he became. She didn't need pity. She needed space to bloom. But Clara didn't see any of that. In her mind, his interest could only mean one thing: a mistake. A maid with no titles, no family name, no presentable past. She couldn't understand why someone like Davy would truly care. She thought he was confused, that it was charity masked as curiosity, and so every time her heart wanted to step forward, her mind pulled it back, reminding her that someone like her didn't belong in the world he came from. Still, Davy didn't back down. He didn't make promises of love. He didn't stage grand gestures. He simply stayed close. He found out Clara had lived in that mansion for years, like a shadow inside the very house, slept in a windowless room, worked since she was a child, never had a place to call home. That moved something in him, something deep. He made a decision. This story wasn't going to end like this, even if he had to help from the shadows. He called his most trusted assistant. Julia had worked with him for years. She knew how to handle delicate matters. When Davy shared his plan, she didn't question. She simply listened, understood, and left. At the bus station, Clara still occupied the same spot. Eyes even more distant, like someone growing used to being invisible. Julia approached slowly, sat beside her, and started a conversation like she'd seen Clara there before. Said she passed by every day, and something about that girl had touched her heart. Clara was wary, but there was something in Julia's voice that kept her from walking away. Maybe it was the steady tone, maybe the sincere eyes, maybe just the exhaustion of running. She accepted the invitation, not knowing that once again her life was about to turn a corner. Julia's home was modest but warm. Within the first few days, Clara tried to repay the kindness by helping with chores. She washed dishes, swept the floor, wiped down surfaces, not out of obligation but because it felt like the only way to earn the roof over her head. Julia watched quietly and noticed this girl didn't know how to receive. She wasn't used to being cared for. On the third night after dinner, Julia made tea and finally opened up. She mentioned a prestigious university offering scholarships for vulnerable youth, explained how the program worked, gave Clara a brochure, talked about the opportunity to study. Clara listened silently. Inside her, desire and fear collided. Her mind whispered that it wasn't for her. Her heart whispered, maybe it was. But that wasn't all. Julia said she also knew of a job opening at a reputable company. Nothing glamorous, but honest work, with benefits and room to grow. Clara frowned. Why her? Julia smiled gently and said, because I saw in you what no one else did, and because everyone deserves at least one open door. What Clara didn't know was that every detail had been carefully crafted behind the scenes. The scholarship program, funded by a foundation that bore Davy's grandfather's name. The job opening, created just for her, based on skills Davy had quietly researched. But none of that would be revealed, not yet. Davy knew, someone who's been used too many times needs space to trust, not another voice saying, this is for your own good. That night, Clara lay in the guest room not knowing what to do with so much kindness. Maybe she still didn't trust good things, but for the first time she fell asleep feeling that someone believed she had a future. When life finally opens a door, sometimes we can't believe it's really for us. If you've ever felt afraid to accept something good, write in the comments, maybe I deserve it, because that one phrase might be the first step for someone else to stand up again. The world spins in such wide circles that sometimes it feels like it's mocking those who thought they had seen it all. While Clara quietly followed her daily routine, split between a job that demanded effort and classes that demanded hope, something much bigger was collapsing behind the scenes of the elite. On the news, another bombshell erupted. The wedding of Natalia Amaral, once the talk of the city with its display of luxury, glamour and media coverage, was now revealed to be a facade financed with public funds embezzled through her father's company. The news spread like poison in clear water. The videos of the Ceremony, once praised online as symbols of elegance and power, were now being used as evidence in corruption scandals. Mansions were seized, millions vanished, public contracts fell under investigation. But what truly shocked the public was a name among the distinguished guests. David Montenegro, one of the city's most respected businessmen, had given a speech at the party and appeared in photos alongside those involved. Even without any real connection to the Amaral family, his image was now caught in the storm. Davy was forced to respond with proof. He gathered documents, showed emails, presented dates and context. He clarified that his presence at the event had been strictly formal, as a representative of a consortium that partnered with the construction firm. There was no direct involvement, but by the time the headlines were corrected, the damage was already done. And when Clara saw his name linked to the scandal, the ground beneath her shifted. She hadn't known about the connection, and now everything felt like a trap, too elaborate to be mere coincidence. She went to the office, the same address written on the business card he had given her at the bus terminal. She needed answers. She arrived with hesitant steps and wary eyes. As she entered, she came face to face with Julia, the woman who had once helped her at her lowest moment. And there, surrounded by files, plaques and framed photos, the pieces began to fall into place. Davi had been behind the tie. Scholarship, the job, the apartment, the opportunity. It wasn't coincidence, it was a plan. Was it care or control? Her chest tightened. She burst through the meeting room door, unannounced. Davi looked up and saw her eyes filled with tears, her voice trembling between hurt and outrage. Was it all a lie? She asked. Did you just want to play the noble rich man saving the helpless poor girl? The pain in her face spoke louder than any accusation. The silence that followed was heavy, like the dust in the air after something crumbles. Davy rose slowly, approached her, not with arrogance but with the tenderness of someone holding something fragile. He wiped her tears with his thumb and said, "Just listen, for 1 minute. I saw what they did to you that night. I saw how they crushed you for simply existing in a place they said wasn't yours. And I was furious, because I saw a woman with rare dignity, and I promised, even in silence, that I would do everything I could to lift you off that floor." She tried to resist, her voice cracking. "In exchange for what?" Davi sighed, took a step back and replied louder, with pain and restrained anger. "Stop it, Clara. Please understand this once and for all. Not everyone who gets close to you wants to hurt you. I'm not like that." Then came what she never expected to hear. "I want you to study, to become qualified, not because I think you're not enough, but because I want to make sure no one ever dares to diminish you again. I want to change the way you see yourself. I want you to know that you're incredible, that you can and deserve to be loved. And all I want is to be by your side, cheering for your victories, helping in any way I can. I love you, Clara. Since the very first moment I saw you." The room went silent, but it was the kind of silence that comes before a decision, the kind that either shatters everything or begins something new. When someone sees in you what you can't yet see, it might just be the start of everything. If this part of the story touched you, write in the comments, "Maybe I deserve to be loved too." You might inspire someone to believe again. For the first time, Clara allowed herself to trust. Still afraid, yes, with a heart full of scars that burned from time to time. But now she knew she didn't have to be a prisoner of what she had lived. Life had taught her, with pain, that not every helping hand is sincere. But Davi proved, through presence and quiet actions, that real love doesn't demand, doesn't manipulate, doesn't vanish. She kept studying, growing, qualifying. The past still echoed in corners of her soul, but it no longer dictated her direction, and beside her stood the one who never gave up on watching her bloom, her greatest supporter, her safe haven, her true love. Davy didn't just admire Clara, he celebrated each of her victories as if they were his own, and little by little, the world that once felt so cruel finally began to soften. They lived light days, lighter than Clara had ever imagined possible, and it was during one of those ordinary days, at an elegant restaurant in the city, that fate decided to whisper one of its poetic ironies. The clatter of a tray hitting the floor drew everyone's attention. A customer with an air of superiority had deliberately knocked over the porcelain dish of a waitress, and there, on her knees, picking up shards from the floor, was Natalia, the same Natalia who had once publicly humiliated Clara, the same woman who smiled with her lips and wounded with her eyes. Now she was the one who felt the cold floor of a place never meant for royalty. Working with dignity, yes, but without her empire, her poise, her applause. She was only there because an old acquaintance had offered her the job after her arrest and the public collapse of the Amaral family. Their eyes met. For a moment, time froze. But unlike what many would expect, Clara didn't smile with revenge. She didn't feel victorious. Only the exact weight of justice. In Natalia's hunched posture, she saw the same pain that once burned inside her, and perhaps for the first time, she understood that returning evil for evil would only mean staying trapped in the very same ground that once brought her down. She squeezed Davy's hand, and he understood, without needing words, that this was a new final chapter, one that didn't just close a story, but rewrote who she had become. Some stories aren't about revenge, but about rebuilding, about moving forward even with scars, choosing not to carry the poison you were once given. Clara didn't come back to hurt anyone. She came back to prove, to herself, that she could be bigger than the pain she suffered. And she was. Because true justice isn't shouted, it's lived. And when love finds room to grow, even the past must bow before the dignity of someone who chose not to repay hate with hate. And if you also believe that silent justice is the most powerful, comment below. I choose to rise above. New stories are coming. Click the video below and allow yourself to feel everything again. See you soon.